My brothers and sisters, one of the greatest blessings of Allah is peace of mind and a pure heart. But sometimes, the very people we love the most become the source of our deepest pain. A toxic relationship drains your energy, steals your joy, and pushes you away from Allah's mercy. Islam teaches us kindness, respect, and balance. Yet when these are missing, your soul begins to suffocate. Today, let us open our eyes and recognize the signs of such harmful connections, so we can protect our iman, preserve our dignity, and walk the path that Allah has chosen for us. When we speak about toxic relationships, one of the most painful realities is when control replaces respect and manipulation replaces trust. A healthy relationship is supposed to be built on mutual understanding, kindness, and freedom within the boundaries of Islam. Allah has given every human being dignity, choice, and the ability to think, yet in a toxic bond, one person slowly begins to strip that away from the other. It starts subtly, perhaps with small restrictions, with checking your phone, demanding to know every detail of your day, or questioning every friend you speak to. At first it may even seem like care or concern, but deep inside it is not love, it is control. Real love gives space, while a toxic love suffocates. When a person constantly tries to control you, they are not protecting you, they are imprisoning you. They want you to think the way they think, dress the way they want, talk only when they allow, and move only within the lines they draw. This is not the sunnah of the Prophet. Our Prophet treated his family with respect, kindness, and compassion, and never once do we find him manipulating or emotionally blackmailing those around him. Instead, he uplifted them, made them feel secure, and valued their voice. Toxic people do the opposite. They make you doubt yourself, they make you believe that without them you are nothing, and they trap you in an invisible cage of fear. Trust is the foundation of every relationship. Without trust, no bond can survive in peace. When a spouse, a friend, or even a family member constantly questions your every action, your every word, and your every decision, what they are saying to you indirectly is, "I do not believe in you. I do not value your integrity." This breaks a person from the inside. Islam teaches us husnul dan, having a good opinion of others, especially those closest to us. But a toxic person throws suspicion at every step. They accuse without proof, they assume without clarity, and they treat you like a criminal when all you want is to live with sincerity. This constant doubt slowly drains your mental health, makes you anxious, and even pushes you away from your natural self. Manipulation is another dark side of control. A toxic person will twist words, play with emotions, and make you feel guilty for things that are not even your fault. They may say, "If you loved me, you would do this," or, "If you really cared, you wouldn't say no." This is emotional blackmail, and it is deeply damaging because it makes the victim feel trapped. They begin to sacrifice their own well-being just to keep the other person happy. This is not sacrifice for Allah, this is slavery to another human being, and no soul deserves to be enslaved in this way. In Islam, compromise and sacrifice are acts of love, but they are meant to be mutual. When only one side is giving and the other is constantly taking, it is no longer love. It is oppression. The danger of such control is that it kills individuality and weakens faith. A believer is supposed to have confidence, dignity, and a direct connection with Allah. But in a toxic relationship, the controller replaces Allah in your heart, making themselves the ultimate authority. Instead of asking, "Is Allah pleased with me?" you start asking, "Will he or she be pleased with me?" That shift is destructive, because it turns a human being into an idol in your life, and your peace becomes chained to their moods and demands. Slowly, your voice becomes silent, your choices disappear, and your heart feels heavy every time you are near them. This is not the life that Allah intended for you, because Islam came to free people from oppression, not to bind them in chains of fear and manipulation. One of the clearest signs of a toxic relationship is when love is no longer expressed through mercy and compassion but through verbal, emotional, or even physical abuse. What should be a source of comfort turns into a source of pain. Words have power, and when those words are constantly harsh, degrading, or filled with anger, they cut deeper than a sword. A toxic person uses words not to heal but to wound, not to uplift but to destroy. They might insult your intelligence, mock your appearance, belittle your efforts, or constantly remind you of your past mistakes. Over time, these words sink into the heart and create scars that no one else can see. You begin to question your worth, doubt your abilities, and sometimes even believe that you deserve such treatment. This is not love, this is oppression, an illness completely against it. Emotional abuse is another form of hidden cruelty that many people endure in silence. Unlike physical abuse, it does not leave visible bruises, but it leaves wounds on the heart and mind. Emotional abuse often comes in the form of manipulation, humiliation, or withdrawal of affection. A toxic person might ignore you when you need comfort, give you silent treatment to punish you, or use your secrets against you. They might constantly remind you of how much you owe them, or how no one else would ever accept you. This constant emotional pressure can make you feel trapped, like you are walking on eggshells, never knowing what will trigger their next outburst. Instead of being a safe space, the relationship becomes a battlefield, where you are always on the defensive. The Prophet A taught us that the best of people are those who are best to their families, and he himself was the most gentle and caring. A toxic relationship flips this teaching upside down by making cruelty the norm and kindness a rare exception. Physical abuse is the most visible and alarming form of toxicity. When someone resorts to hitting, shoving, or using physical strength to dominate, they are committing a grave injustice. Allah has made it clear that oppression in any form is forbidden, and the Prophet never raised his hand against his wives, his children, or his companions. To harm another human being physically in the name of love is a betrayal of both trust and faith. Yet, many victims stay silent out of fear, shame, or dependency. They begin to normalize the pain, convincing themselves that it is temporary or that they somehow deserve it. But no human being deserves to live in fear of the very person who is supposed to protect and care for them. The most dangerous aspect of abuse, whether verbal, emotional, or physical, is that it becomes disguised as love. The abuser might say hurtful words and then apologize with gifts. They might strike in anger and then claim it was only because they care too much. They may cry, beg for forgiveness, and promise change, only to repeat the same cycle again and again. This cycle confuses the victim, making them hope for the good moments while enduring the bad. But true love does not coexist with abuse. Love in Islam is based on mercy, and mercy never humiliates, never harms, never manipulates. When a relationship robs you of your peace, when your heart trembles more with fear than with love, then it is no longer a relationship that pleases Allah. Jealousy and insecurity are among the most poisonous roots of a toxic relationship, because instead of nurturing love and trust, they choke the bond with suspicion and fear. A healthy relationship allows each person to grow, to shine, and to celebrate one another's successes, but a toxic one turns every achievement into a threat, and every step of independence into a cause for conflict. When someone is deeply insecure, he cannot tolerate seeing the other person happy without them, or successful beyond them. They constantly feel as if they are being compared, left behind, or replaced. This insecurity drives them to control, to restrict, and to cage the person they claim to love. Instead of saying, "I am proud of you," they say, "Why do you need this? Why do you want that? Who are you trying to impress?" Their jealousy disguises itself as concern, but in reality it is fear of losing control. Jealousy manifests in many subtle ways. It can appear in constant questioning about who you talk to, where you go, and why you smiled at someone. It can be the constant suspicion of betrayal, even when there is no proof. A toxic partner or family member may even try to isolate you from your friends, colleagues, or loved ones, convincing you that no one truly cares about you except them. This isolation feeds their insecurity, because the less connected you are to others, the more control they gain over you. Instead of building trust, they build walls, and those walls become prisons. This is not the Islamic way. Islam encourages love built on honesty, trust, and openness, not one poisoned by suspicion and constant interrogation. Insecurity also prevents the relationship from having peace. The insecure person is never satisfied, no matter how much attention, love, or assurance you give them. They want to know every detail, they want to be involved in every decision, and they want to be the center of your universe. The moment you give time to yourself, to your work, or even to your acts of worship, they feel threatened. Slowly, this insecurity makes you feel suffocated, as though your life no longer belongs to you. You start walking on eggshells, carefully choosing your words, avoiding certain actions, just to prevent them from becoming jealous or suspicious. Over time, this drains your energy, and makes you lose the joy of simply being yourself. The most destructive part of jealousy in a toxic relationship is that it blinds the person to reality. They may accuse you of things you never even thought of, punish you for betrayals you never committed, and hold you accountable for scenarios that only exist in their imagination. The Quran warns us about suspicion, for indeed much suspicion is sinful, because it breaks hearts and relationships unnecessarily. A toxic relationship fueled by jealousy creates an environment of constant defense, where you are always proving your loyalty instead of enjoying the bond. When love is genuine, it celebrates freedom, growth, and trust. But when jealousy and insecurity take over, the relationship becomes more about ownership than partnership, more about fear than affection, and more about control than love. Disrespect and humiliation are among the most painful elements of a toxic relationship, because they directly target a person's dignity and self-worth. A relationship that should provide comfort, encouragement, and love instead becomes a source of constant belittlement. When someone repeatedly dismisses your opinions, mocks your feelings, or makes you feel small in front of others, it leaves scars that words cannot erase. Disrespect is not always loud. Sometimes it is hidden in subtle gestures, in rolling eyes when you speak, in ignoring your presence, or in cutting you off before you finish your sentence. Over time, this treatment makes a person feel invisible, as though their voice and value no longer matter. Islam teaches us that every believer has honor, and that humiliating another person is a serious sin. Yet in a toxic relationship, this teaching is completely ignored. Humiliation often becomes a weapon used to control. A toxic partner or family member may deliberately insult you in public, criticize your weaknesses in front of others, or compare you negatively with someone else. They may highlight your mistakes again and again, just to remind you of your flaws, as though you are never good enough. Instead of correcting you with kindness and private advice, they tear you down with harsh words and ridicule. This type of behavior crushes the heart, because everyone desires respect, especially from the people closest to them. When respect is replaced with humiliation, love turns into fear, and companionship turns into shame. The Prophet was known for his gentleness. Even when he corrected others, he did so with wisdom and kindness, never with insults or mockery. A toxic relationship completely contradicts this prophetic example by normalizing disrespect. The damage caused by disrespect is deep and long-lasting. A person who is constantly humiliated begins to lose confidence in themselves. They may stop pursuing their goals, stop voicing their opinions, and even stop believing in their own worth. This emotional damage often carries over into other areas of life, affecting work, friendships, and even one's relationship with Allah. When someone constantly tells you that you are worthless, weak, or incapable, eventually those words echo in your own thoughts. You start to believe them, and that belief becomes a barrier between you and your potential. This is why toxic relationships are so destructive. They do not just harm your present moments, they slowly rewrite the way you see yourself. Disrespect also poisons the atmosphere of the relationship. Instead of feeling safe, loved, and supported, you feel constantly judged and devalued. Every conversation becomes a battle, every disagreement turns into an attack, and every attempt to express yourself is dismissed. The beauty of a healthy bond is that even in moments of disagreement, there is still kindness and understanding. But in a toxic bond, disagreement becomes an excuse for cruelty, and humiliation becomes a habit. Over time, this erodes the foundation of the relationship until nothing but bitterness remains. A bond without respect cannot flourish, because respect is the soil in which love grows. When the soil is poisoned with humiliation, the plant withers no matter how much love you try to pour into it. One of the clearest indicators of a toxic relationship is when the balance of giving and taking is lost, and the relationship becomes one-sided. In a healthy bond, both individuals invest their time, emotions, and efforts to nurture and sustain the connection. There is mutual sacrifice, mutual understanding, and mutual benefit. But in a toxic relationship, only one person keeps giving while the other continues to take without appreciation or acknowledgement. This imbalance drains the giver, leaving them emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically exhausted. Love in its pure form is never meant to be slavery, yet when the burden falls only on one side, the relationship becomes suffocating instead of supportive. A one-sided relationship often starts with small sacrifices. One person begins to compromise more, let go of their needs, and prioritize the other's happiness. At first, it might feel noble, even selfless, because sacrifice is a sign of love. But over time, this pattern becomes exploited by the toxic partner. They begin to expect the sacrifice, to demand it, and to treat it not as a gift but as an obligation. The more one gives, the more the other takes, without one stopping to reciprocate or to express gratitude. The giver keeps hoping that one day the other person will notice, will change, will finally give back the same energy, but that day never comes. The result is an endless cycle of depletion, where one person's heart and energy are poured out until nothing remains. One of the painful aspects of this imbalance is the way it affects self-worth. The one who keeps giving begins to believe that their value lies only in what they provide, not in who they are. They measure their importance by how well they can keep the other person happy, forgetting that they themselves are worthy of love and respect simply for existing as Allah's creation. This mindset slowly erodes confidence and dignity. When your worth is tied only to how much you can do for someone else, you begin to neglect your own needs, dreams, and well-being. Islam, however, teaches balance in relationships. The Prophet said, "Your body has a right over you, your eyes have a right over you, your family has a right over you." This hadith reminds us that neglecting ourselves for the sake of another human being is not a virtue when it crosses into self-destruction. Another sign of a one-sided relationship is the absence of appreciation. No matter how much effort is made, it is never acknowledged, or worse, it is taken for granted. The giver may cook, clean, support financially, provide emotional care, or go out of their way to ease the other person's burdens, yet instead of gratitude, they receive criticism or indifference. This constant lack of acknowledgement can feel like pouring water into a bottomless pit. It does not matter how much is given, it is never enough. Over time, this fosters feelings of resentment, loneliness, and it is heartbreaking to realize that the very person for whom you sacrifice everything does not even notice or value your efforts. The imbalance also creates a dangerous dynamic of power and dependency. The one who keeps taking grows accustomed to being served and begins to feel entitled. They may even manipulate or guilt-trip the giver into doing more, saying things like, "If you really loved me, you would do this," or "You are supposed to sacrifice because you care." This manipulation deepens the imbalance, trapping the giver in a cycle where love becomes measured only by service and sacrifice. On the other hand, the giver becomes increasingly dependent on the other's approval, hoping that by giving more, they will finally earn love and validation. This dependency is dangerous because it replaces genuine love with fear and desperation. Instead of asking whether the relationship pleases Allah, the giver constantly wonders whether they have done enough to please the other person. Financial imbalance is another form of one-sidedness in toxic relationships. One person may carry all the financial responsibilities, pay all the bills, or cover every expense while the other contributes little to nothing. While there are times in life when one partner may need more support than the other, in a toxic relationship, this becomes permanent. The giver works tirelessly while the taker feels no responsibility, sometimes even criticizing the very efforts being made for their comfort. This creates a sense of exploitation, where one person's hard work is used to maintain a lifestyle for both, but only one bears the burden. Islam emphasizes fairness and accountability. An exploitation of this kind is far from the balance that Allah commands in relationships. Emotional imbalance is equally draining. In a healthy bond, both individuals share their struggles and offer each other comfort. But in a toxic one-sided relationship, only one person's pain, needs and desires matter. The taker unloads their burdens constantly while ignoring the struggles of the other. The giver listens, comforts, and carries the emotional weight, yet when they themselves need support, they find none. This lack of emotional reciprocity creates deep loneliness. To be physically present with someone but emotionally neglected is one of the most painful experiences. It makes a person feel invisible, as though their heart's cries are unheard and their soul's needs are unimportant. Another way this imbalance appears is in decision-making. In a toxic relationship, decisions always revolve around the taker's needs. Where to go, what to do, how to spend time or money. Everything is centered on their preferences. The giver has little to no voice in shaping the direction of their shared life. This silencing can leave a person feeling powerless, as though their opinions hold no value. In Islam, shura as a mutual consultation is emphasized even within families. The Prophet consulted his wives and companions, valuing their opinions. A relationship that silences one voice and magnifies the other contradicts this teaching and leads to deep injustice. Spiritual imbalance can also be seen in toxic one-sided relationships. Sometimes, the toxic partner discourages or prevents acts of worship, making the giver compromise their faith for the sake of peace in the relationship. The giver may sacrifice their time for salah, Quran, or religious growth just to avoid conflict with the other person. Over time, this weakens their connection with Allah and makes the toxic person the center of their life instead of their creator. The ultimate tragedy of a one One-sided relationship is when pleasing the human becomes more important than pleasing Allah, and the soul becomes enslaved to the demands of another instead of the commands of its Lord. The long-term effect of one-sidedness is exhaustion. The giver becomes emotionally burned out, physically drained, and spiritually weakened. No matter how much love they pour into the relationship, it never feels enough, and the lack of reciprocity leaves them empty. They begin to feel as though they are carrying the entire weight of the relationship alone, while the other simply rides along. This imbalance cannot sustain a bond, because relationships are not meant to be carried by one person. Just as a bird cannot fly with one wing, a relationship cannot survive on the efforts of only one side over time. A giver may begin to lose their identity entirely. Their goals, dreams, and individuality are sacrificed for the sake of maintaining the relationship. They may stop pursuing education, career, or personal growth because all their energy is consumed by keeping the other person satisfied. This loss of identity is devastating, because it robs the person of their uniqueness and the purpose Allah created them for. When a relationship prevents someone from being who Allah intended them to be, it ceases to be a blessing and becomes a burden. The beauty of companionship in Islam lies in partnership, where each supports the other in worldly matters and spiritual growth. When one person is left to carry it all while the other only enjoys the benefits, the relationship transforms into an injustice disguised as love. A toxic relationship does not only drain your emotions or weaken your self-worth, it has the power to damage your faith and distance you from Allah. When the bond you are in constantly pulls you away from the remembrance of your Creator, then it is no longer just harmful to your heart, it becomes harmful to your soul. Islam teaches us that everything in life should bring us closer to Allah, whether it is our friendships, our marriages, or our family ties. A healthy relationship is one that supports your faith, encourages you to do good, and strengthens your iman. But when the relationship becomes toxic, it pushes you in the opposite direction. Instead of feeling inspired to worship, you feel distracted and burdened. Instead of finding peace in your bond, you find heaviness in your chest. And instead of walking toward Allah together, you are pulled away from Him by the very person who should have been a source of support. One of the most obvious ways a toxic relationship weakens faith is by consuming your energy and attention to the point that you neglect your acts of worship. When you are constantly in conflict, always defending yourself, or always trying to please someone who can never be satisfied, your mind is too exhausted to focus on Salah, Quran, or Dhikr. Even when you stand in prayer, your heart is distracted by the arguments, the insults, or the fear of the next conflict. Salah, which should be the source of your peace, becomes rushed and heavy. Instead of remembering Allah with love, you are remembering the pain caused by a toxic relationship. Slowly, the sweetness of worship fades, not because you do not love Allah, but because your heart is constantly burdened with human problems. This is one of the ways Shaitan uses toxic relationships to pull people away from their Lord. Another way toxicity affects faith is through disobedience. Sometimes, the toxic person demands things that are against Islam, and the victim feels pressured to obey just to keep the peace. They might be forced to lie, to compromise their modesty, to cut off ties with family unjustly, or to neglect obligations like prayer and fasting. Each of these compromises takes the person one step further from Allah. At first, it may seem small, missing a prayer here, lying about something there. But over time, these habits build and weaken the heart. The tragedy is that in trying to preserve the relationship, a person ends up damaging their relationship with Allah, the very one who gave them life and sustenance. A bond that constantly makes you disobey Allah is not love, it is a test, and one of the most dangerous forms of oppression in many toxic relationships. Fear replaces love. Instead of feeling safe and cherished, the victim feels anxious and terrified. Fear of anger, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. These emotions begin to control every action. But in Islam, the only fear that should dominate the heart is the fear of Allah, which leads to humility and righteousness. When a person fears their partner or family member more than they fear Allah, their entire perspective shifts. They begin to prioritize the toxic person's moods over Allah's commands. They ask themselves, will he be angry if I do this? Or, will she leave me if I say no? Instead of asking, is Allah pleased with me if I do this? This shift of focus is dangerous, because it places the creation above the Creator. The heart that once beat for Allah now beats in fear of another human, and this imbalance makes the soul restless and uneasy. The Quran and Sunnah emphasize the importance of companionship that leads to righteousness. Allah reminds us to be with those who remember Him often, and to avoid those who distract us from His path. The Prophet said that a person is upon the religion of their close companion, so each of you should be careful whom you befriend. This hadith is not limited to friendships, it applies to all close relationships, including marriage. If the one closest to you encourages sin, mocks your faith, or distracts you from worship, then their influence will seep into your heart, whether you realize it or not. You may begin to adopt their habits, to normalize their sins, and to justify their wrongs. Over time, the line between right and wrong becomes blurred, and your iman becomes weaker. A toxic relationship does not just hurt your emotions, it poisons your spiritual compass. Another way toxic relationships distance people from Allah is by planting despair in the heart. Constant humiliation, criticism, or abuse makes a person feel worthless. They begin to believe that they are unlovable, incapable, and beyond repair. This feeling of worthlessness often extends to their connection with Allah. They may think, if the person closest to me sees me as worthless, maybe Allah does too. This thought is a whisper from Shaitan, who uses toxic relationships to make people despair of Allah's mercy. Islam, however, teaches that every soul is precious to Allah, and that His mercy is greater than all sins and all pain. But when someone is constantly told they are nothing, they begin to lose hope, not just in themselves but in Allah's plan for them. This loss of hope is one of the most dangerous spiritual consequences of toxicity. Toxic relationships also create environments where sin thrives. When there is constant conflict, people may resort to shouting, cursing, backbiting, or even physical aggression. These sins become normalized, repeated daily until they feel like part of life. Children growing up in such homes witness this behavior and may internalize it, continuing the cycle of toxicity into their own lives. A home that should have been a place of peace and mercy becomes a breeding ground for anger and resentment. This environment drives away the angels of mercy and invites darkness into the household. The Prophet taught us that the angels do not enter a house where there is constant arguing, or where Allah's remembrance is absent. A toxic relationship, filled with shouting and hostility, is exactly the kind of place where light is dimmed and hearts are hardened. Another dangerous effect of a toxic relationship is distraction from purpose. Every believer has a mission in life, to worship Allah, to serve humanity, and to grow in goodness. But when all your energy is consumed by the chaos of a toxic bond, you have little strength left for your true purpose. You may abandon opportunities to learn, to serve, to grow, simply because you are exhausted from trying to survive the relationship. You might decline invitations to gatherings of knowledge or avoid community work because you are drained from constant arguments. Slowly your world shrinks, and your life revolves only around managing the demands of the toxic person. This distraction is exactly what Shaitan wants, for you to be so busy with human conflict that you forget your journey to Jannah. The constant negativity of a toxic relationship can also affect the heart's ability to connect with Allah in sincerity. When you are surrounded by criticism, anger, or abuse, your heart becomes heavy with sadness and bitterness. This heaviness often carries into your worship. Instead of standing before Allah with love and focus, you stand with a broken spirit, your mind clouded by pain. While Allah is the ultimate healer, a toxic environment makes it difficult to taste the sweetness of faith. You may find yourself making dua less often, or you may feel that your duas are not being heard, because your heart is too weighed down by human problems. This is why it is so important to recognize that the state of your relationships directly impacts the state of your spirituality. In many cases, toxic relationships even push people toward haram as a form of escape. Someone who feels neglected or constantly abused may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like addiction, haram relationships, or neglecting their obligations, simply to numb the pain. Instead of turning to Allah for comfort, they turn to temporary distractions that only worsen their state. This is one of the subtle ways in which toxicity distances people from their faith. By making them feel so broken, it drives them into the arms of dunya for relief instead of into the arms of their creator. The loneliness caused by a toxic relationship is also spiritually dangerous. Ironically, being with someone toxic can make you feel lonelier than being alone. When you are constantly unheard, unloved, and unsupported, you begin to feel isolated even in the presence of others. This isolation often makes people withdraw from their friends, family, and community, cutting them off from sources of support and goodness. As a result, they feel as though they have no one but the toxic person, which makes it even harder to leave. In this state of isolation, faith can weaken because community is an essential part of Islam. Congregational prayer, Friday khutbahs, and gatherings of knowledge are all designed to strengthen believers through unity. But when a toxic relationship isolates you, you lose that connection, and your iman suffers quietly in the background. The cycle of guilt and shame is another tool that toxic people use to control. They might constantly remind you of your flaws, your sins, or your past mistakes, making you feel unworthy of Allah's love. They may even use religion as a weapon, twisting verses or hadith to manipulate you into obedience. For example, they may demand submission while ignoring the Prophet's teachings of kindness and respect. This misuse of religion is one of the most harmful forms of toxicity, because it distorts your understanding of Islam. Instead of seeing Allah as merciful and just, you begin to see Him through the lens of fear and oppression presented by the toxic person. This false image of faith distances you from Allah instead of bringing you closer to Him. A toxic relationship that weakens your faith is not just harmful to you, it can also affect generations. Children who grow up watching a parent's iman being suffocated by toxicity often inherit the same struggles. They either repeat the cycle by entering toxic relationships themselves, or they grow distant from faith, because they associate religion with pain and oppression. The damage is not limited to one person. It spreads like a shadow across families and communities. This is why protecting your iman within relationships is not only about your own soul, but about the souls that are connected to you. The ultimate tragedy of a toxic relationship is that it can make you forget your true worth in the sight of Allah. When someone constantly disrespects you, or makes you feel small, you may begin to believe that their view of you is reality. But Allah reminds us in the Quran that He created mankind in the best form, that He honored the children of Adam, and that every soul has value. A toxic relationship tries to erase this truth, replacing it with lies of worthlessness and despair. When you start to internalize those lies, your connection with Allah becomes clouded, because you no longer approach Him with hope and confidence. Instead, you approach Him with guilt, fear, and self-doubt, thinking that you are unworthy of His mercy. Yet, the mercy of Allah is greater than any pain, and His love is not diminished by the cruelty of people. This is why recognizing when a relationship is pulling you away from Allah is so important. It is not just about protecting your emotions, it is about protecting your iman. A relationship that causes you to neglect your worship, to sin regularly, to fear creation more than the Creator, and to despair of Allah's mercy is one that endangers your hereafter as well as your dunya. Every believer must reflect on whether the people closest to them are helping them walk toward Jannah, or dragging them toward destruction. This reflection requires courage, honesty, and trust in Allah's plan, because sometimes the hardest decisions in life are the ones that protect your soul for eternity.